Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So you know that we have Torah little t and Torah capital T. And so all Jewish teaching and all teaching about how to live to be better people and living in line with holiness and justice and compassion and equity, all of that is considered Torah. So we often say to each other in the learning world, it's like, what's the Torah that you're teaching right now? What's the Torah that's speaking to you right now, right? And so it doesn't mean the text of the Torah. It means teaching. Torah means teaching. So I took that seriously this week because this is a special Shabbat. This is the Shabbat before Pesach. And on the Shabbat before Pesach, we have a special Torah reading. It's not the normal following through the book of Leviticus, what we would read after we read Vayikra. So we have a special Torah portion, Tzav, that we read on the Shabbat before Pesach. But I decided, because I got enough feedback from y'all that you kind of enjoyed learning a little bit outside of just the Torah text, and you liked putting some of this into context of the calendar and some other traditions. So I've decided that the text we're going to look at is related to Shabbat HaGadol, instead of looking at Tzav. So we're not going to look at the Torah portion for Shabbat HaGadol. We're going to talk about Shabbat HaGadol and look at some commentary on Shabbat and how Shabbat relates to Shabbat HaGadol. Okay? So we have a couple of things going on. All right. So we are going to look at text, but first I want to introduce you to something that I think all of you need to know. Shabbat HaGadol, the big Shabbat, right? The Shabbat before Pesach. What if you had no idea? You just hear someone say, this is Shabbat HaGadol. You'd be like, what did she just say? Shabbat HaKachol, the blue Shabbat? Is that what she just said? So if you don't know, you can use this amazing tool that I'm going to show you, because this is my responsibility, to teach you not just stuff, but how to learn stuff. All right. So you can go to this wonderful resource called My Jewish Learning. So you go to myjewishlearning.com. It's free. You can set up an account for free and keep articles in like a folder for yourself at this website. Or you can print out the articles, obviously, or copy the text and put it in your own files. The point is, you go over here to this nifty search function and you just put in Shabbat HaGadol. See, there it is. I already searched it for you because I'm that kind of a teacher. So Shabbat HaGadol, there it is. I already pulled up an article. So this is how you would figure out, this is a great place to start anytime you're looking at some Jewish thing or context or idea or text. This is a great place to start, because what it does is it not only explains it to you, but it gives you links, right? So that you can link through to any of these things that are underlined or starred to see an article on that. So you can spend a long time getting from Shabbat HaGadol to lots of other things that are connected, and you can go down lots of different rabbit holes with this, okay? It is generally not slanted. It is generally not a commentary that is conservative or more to the progressive end. It is really mostly factual, and was created by the Jewish Federation, I believe, so that Jews of all stripes could access just basic information about a certain concept. So Shabbat HaGadol, there you go. There are many explanations as to why the Sabbath before Passover is called Shabbat HaGadol. Really? I wonder what some of those are. Well, according to tradition, now see, as soon as you say according to tradition, like, right, there you go. That's a safe way to say, some Jews say. According to tradition, the 10th of Nisan in the year of the Exodus was Shabbat. It was a Saturday. It was considered a great event. In fact, a miracle that the Israelites could on that day select a lamb for sacrifice without being molested by their Egyptian masters, who at other times would have stoned them for such daring. So here you have, this is from Orach Chaim, from the Code of Jewish Law, and you can go to the citation if you want. You can click on the citation, okay, and read the text where we see this idea. Another possible reason for the name is that the Haftarah from Malachi, again, you can click on Malachi, the text here. The prophetic portion speaks of the great day of God on which the Mashiach will appear. A novel explanation for the name of Shabbat HaGadol is that the people used to return from the synagogue later than usual on this Sabbath because of the unusually long sermon that was customary on this day. So the big Shabbat means the one where the rabbi talked a lot, and we got home a lot later, and lunch was a lot later than usual. I like that one. The custom of reciting the Haggadah in the afternoon of Shabbat HaGadol was designed to familiarize the people with its content in preparation for the Seder service that week. Again, from Orach Chaim. All right. So here we learn that there was a custom on the afternoon of Shabbat of the text that they looked at not being a Torah text, but they actually studied the text of the Haggadah so that they were ready for Pesach, right? So in our case, Shabbat HaGadol is the day of the first Seder. So we begin it tonight, Shabbat HaGadol. It goes through tomorrow. And at the end of Shabbat HaGadol is the Seder. All right. So wouldn't give us a lot of time to prepare, but those of us who do things last minute, it's plenty. Okay. So just a tool for you to know about My Jewish Learning. It's a great resource. It's a great place to start. And then you can go down lots of different rabbit holes and link to lots of different stuff, or open a new search when you find a new concept that you want to look at. Okay. So this is a great, great resource. All right. So we're going to look at a text brought to us by from IJS, looking at Parshat Tzav, right, for Shabbat HaGadol. So as I said, we're on Parshat Tzav, not the usual lectionary, because we're stepping out of that. We're stepping into Shabbat HaGadol, but I'm not going to do Tzav. But the Sfat Emet goes to Tzav and brings forward this teaching about Shabbat and Shabbat HaGadol. What is the relationship between this idea of Shabbat and the idea of Pesach? So the Sfat Emet is going to link them. Remember we've done Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ger. So B'inyan Shabbat HaGadol. So now he's going to introduce this concept of Shabbat HaGadol. We're going to go to the English. And he said, the roots of redemption are planted within Shabbat. So already the Sfat Emet is suggesting that the redemption of the Exodus, because that's always what redemption means, redemption from slavery, always. For us, that's what Geula is. Redemption is redemption from slavery in Egypt. Then it becomes metaphorical for lots of kinds of ways that we're enslaved and stuck. But redemption is always about redemption from slavery. So the Sfat Emet is saying the roots, now this is very Hasidic, the roots, the cosmic roots of redemption are in Shabbat. All right, what does that mean? What does that mean? For redemption takes place beyond nature. Okay. There is a guiding force that happens through nature, but the Holy One opted to lead Israel, meaning the Exodus, by supernatural means. This is how the Holy One behaves with us on the Holy Shabbat. All right, so something about there are forces that work godliness through nature, because of course it's all created by God. But on Shabbat, God relates to us outside of nature. And that's what God did with the redemption. God could have done it just through the laws of nature, but chose to do it through supernatural means. So already there's a link between Shabbat and Pesach. During the work week, the divine consents to work through the physical world and the laws of nature indirectly. But on Shabbat, God works with us in a higher dimension, meaning beyond nature. Okay? The Holy Blessed One personally effectuated the exodus from Egypt as the Haggadah, right? So now the Sfat Emet is going to quote the Haggadah because that's traditionally studied on Shabbat HaGadol. So it makes sense that he's bringing a text from the actual Haggadah. So the Holy Blessed One personally effectuated the exodus from Egypt as the Haggadah interprets, I and not an angel. This is an aspect of Shabbat. Thus, Passover is also called Shabbat. Is it? Apparently it is. How do we know? We're going to look at footnote number 1. This is a reference to Leviticus 23:15. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. So counting from Pesach to Shavuot, the day after Shabbat. Therefore, Passover is also called Shabbat, meaning the Holy Blessed One could have redeemed Israel by natural means, but the divine wished to give us a higher form of guidance from God's very self. This is how God engages with us on Shabbat, beyond nature, which is ours alone, meaning that this is the special relationship between God and the people of Israel. Thus we say, again, bringing a text from the Haggadah, if the Holy Blessed One had not redeemed us, if anyone who grew up at the Maxwell House Haggadah will recognize this line, as I still see that blue cover every time I think Pesach. If the Holy Blessed One had not redeemed us, we, our children, and our children's children would still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. The Maharal of Prague interpreted this to mean, if God had not brought about the Exodus personally, directly, we would even now still be slaves. And this accords with what we have taught here, that the Holy One led Israel by means of a higher form, one beyond the natural order of space and time. So that's what it means personally, God, God's self. If so, then there is always a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. For whatever takes place in the natural world happens in a certain time and place, but the Exodus from Egypt, which was performed by the Holy Blessed One, God's self, is present to us in every time and every place. Okay. What does any of that mean? So now this is why we need teachers, because Rabbi Feigelson's going to unpack it for us. All right. The Sfat Emet seems to be, really? Does the Sfat Emet seem to be, good, I'm glad somebody understands that. The Sfat Emet seems to be elaborating on Shabbat as a nexus point of two narratives, two consciousnesses. In the first, Shabbat is Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, a remembrance of the creation of the world. On Shabbat, we step out of the artifice of the world that separates us from its divine roots. God created the world and nature, and Shabbat points us back to the divine and all which is beyond nature. In the process, we are able to return to ourselves, to one another, and to the divine in a restorative way. In the second consciousness, Shabbat is Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. In parallel fashion to the creation-oriented consciousness, this Exodus orientation invites us to step out of the ways in which we may be enslaved to things other than the truest reality, to re-embrace our status as creations in the divine image. In our liberation, we connect intimately with our true nature, which is beyond nature. These two consciousnesses are ultimately one. Shabbat is a practice of freedom to return to our deepest self. Okay, so remember, always when we talk about Shabbat, we are talking about two places that we see the commandment of Shabbat. One is that we are to do Shabbat as God did Shabbat in creating the world. It's a remembrance of God Shabbating and Yinafashing when God was creating the world. So that's the first one, Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, right? That it's a remembrance of creation. Sfat Emet is suggesting, according to Rabbi Feigelson, that from IJS, that means how is Shabbat a remembrance of the creation of the world? Is that we step out of the created world and our relationship to it on Shabbat in order to return to our most basic selves and to our root, which is God, of course, and to each other, right? Beyond the natural world, beyond nature. We return to that which is beyond nature. That's Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit. But there's another aspect of creation, as we know, to Shabbat, as we know, because we say it in Kiddush. It's Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's a remembrance of the going out from Egypt. That's the other thing Shabbat is for us, right? So the Sfat Emet says that means there is this Exodus orientation as part of Shabbat, that we have been enslaved to things other than our truest reality. And so Shabbat is our way every week to experience redemption. A little taste, a little Pesach, right? A little taste of redemption from slavery. And so these two consciousnesses ultimately are one. Shabbat is a way to be free from our enslavement to the physical world only, and a way to return to our deepest self and our deepest source, capital S. Yet Pesach adds an additional dimension, a heightened focus to this practice of Shabbat. While every Shabbat invites us to cultivate and live in this liberatory consciousness, Pesach, referred to as HaShabbat, the Shabbat, calls us to focus our attention even more on this ultimate reality. On Pesach, and I just thought this was great because we're studying it on the day before Pesach. On Pesach, we are invited to reflect in a singular way on the reality that it was not some accident of history that enabled us to be free, or indeed that enables any of us to be truly free. Rather, our freedom comes through realizing that the divine indeed works in and through us, while holding out an image, an aspiration for that which is beyond nature and our natural societal construction. When we can genuinely sense that we can embrace our own liberation and work for the liberation of others. That is the miracle of Pesach, the food that allows all of us who are hungry that we're invited to come and eat. Okay. A beautiful teaching about, right? This is the true freedom of Pesach, right? Is that when we free ourselves from some junk, we're able to be truly free and therefore embrace our own liberation, which always means we will be working for the liberation of others, right? Living into our true freedom is always about making sure others are free. That is always the Jewish story. Don't forget that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, right? Don't forget you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Therefore, what? Have a party? No. Eat ragalach? God forbid. Therefore, love the stranger, right? So if you're experiencing liberation, of course, the next Jewish thing to follow from that is, and therefore work for the liberation of all peoples. A beautiful teaching from the Sfat Emet, both about this idea of stepping out of our constraints of the regular world that keeps us, all week in its thrall, and all the ways that we get distracted and chained to material life and reality, and also the Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim consciousness that is about the liberation from Egypt, the liberation and working for the liberation of all people. Then he goes on to talk about inner liberation has to come first, and then that leads to outer liberation. Okay? And chametz are all those things that get us puffed up and blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, stepping out of creation mentality, the natural laws that we all live by, stepping into Shabbat consciousness is part of it, and the Yetziat Mitzrayim consciousness, liberation consciousness, right? And Pesach is HaShabbat. So Pesach is the epitome of both of those types of consciousness that when they come together really affects our true freedom and our ability to work for the freedom of everyone else. A beautiful teaching by the Sfat Emet, brought to us by, thank you, IJS and Rabbi Reb Feigelson. Okay, so this idea of there being something of redemption in every Shabbat, and a special level of that around Shabbat HaGadol and Pesach, and this idea that it enables us to work for liberation, and therefore working against the forces that represent Pharaoh and Egypt and ego and power and tyranny and authoritarianism, and you get where I'm going. Okay, so looking at another commentary on this idea of Shabbat HaGadol and studying the Haggadah on Shabbat HaGadol, which I did not know, and there Margot showing us a Haggadah Shel Pesach, right? So Agadah is telling, as in telling tales, but in a good way, not lies. Telling tales. Agadah, telling. Haggadah is the telling. All right. So I did not know that this was a custom, right? So you learn when you're preparing to teach, you learn a lot. So studying Haggadah, the text of the Haggadah, the telling, is the text of the Seder itself, right? That the rabbis compile over time. Agadah is just telling in general. Okay. So I got an invitation to Lee Conrad's second night Seder where she said it will be no Haggadah, all Agadah. And I was just like, look how clever a Jew she is already. What a clever Jew we produced. A Seder with no Haggadah, all Agadah, right? So telling, yes. Haggadah, the text of the Haggadah, no. Okay. So, but the text of the Haggadah, turns out, is studied on Shabbat HaGadol as Torah. Beautiful. Okay, what a great custom. We Jews are so the people of the book. Doesn't matter which one, apparently. Okay, so let's look at another commentary that brings this idea forward that's a little more pointed as to what I was just saying. And I usually don't get this pointed, but I don't know. It's been a long week after a really hard time, so here we go. All right, So this is from Rabbi Dr. Michael Marmer, who is an incredibly fabulous teacher. If you've ever had the great good fortune to study with him, he is an incredibly dynamic teacher and a just genius brain, coupled with a mouth that just is articulate and amazing. All right. So the liturgical poem known as Dayenu. So all of us know this if we've been to Seder. Even if you've only been to Seder once, you know Dayenu. You know something about it. But those of us who have been to several, if not a crap ton of Seders, we know like almost the whole thing, right? At least the verses we all sing, we know by heart. The liturgical poem known as Dayenu is one of the oldest post-biblical sources in our Haggadah. I did not know that. The core text of the Passover ritual. Some have suggested it may be 2,000 years old. It tells the history of the Jewish people from the exodus from Egypt until the construction of the temple. And at each stage it states, had God only done this for us, it would have been enough. It begins, for example, by saying, had God only taken us out of Egypt and not punished our enemies, it would have been enough. That we are still reciting this text in family rituals conducted around the world by people with differing customs and opinion is truly remarkable. A Passover miracle of its own. True that. The miracle's not complete, however, if all we do is sing the song and smell the soup yet to come. We are also enjoying to consider this version of our people's history and to ask ourselves what we think of it. My interpretation of the first verse against the grain of the literal sense, but in keeping with our radical interpretive tradition, is it would have indeed been better had our freedom not have included suffering and destruction. One couplet in the text is particularly curious. Is it? I never really understood any of that text to be curious. But Rabbi Dr. Marmer says it is, if you look closely. If God had supplied our needs in the desert, but not given us manna to eat, Dayenu, it would have been sufficient. Why is that curious? Well, because if you think about it, he's right. The implication here is that the supply of food, while crucial, is not the only need which needs to be met if a people is to make it through the wilderness, right? Because it said, if God had supplied our needs, but not given us manna, that means we're talking about needs other than food. So he's saying that's kind of weird. Like, wait, so what other needs are there really? Like, other than being fed, but just, okay. So know that that's what the verse is talking about, that there are other needs we have to make it through the wilderness. This year, we have seen many examples, both of the perils of food insecurity, and this is not this year, by the way. I'm not going to tell you what year, because it doesn't matter. This is the way it's beautiful. The Torah and commentary is timeless. This is not from this year or last year. This year, we have seen many examples both of the perils of food insecurity, but also of the fact that we need more than groceries to survive and thrive. We crave company and solidarity, culture and stimulation, medical care, and a social safety net. In some Ashkenazi Haggadot, a phrase appears after the Dayenu text. It reads, thus far on Shabbat HaGadol. The origins of this expression go back, it appears, 1,000 years or so. A number of Ashkenazi communities developed the custom of reading through sections of the Haggadah on the Sabbath before Passover begins. This Sabbath is known as Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Shabbat. Perhaps, as we read in My Jewish Learning, see, we knew that already because we went to My Jewish Learning first, because of the prophetic text read on that day in which Malachi, the prophet, speaks of the great and awesome day of God. Other explanations for the name of this special Shabbat have been offered. We saw one, which is that the rabbi's sermon was especially long, including the idea, I love this, that it may have been called Shabbat HaGadol, and somehow the word was abbreviated and misunderstood and turned into Shabbat HaGadol instead of Shabbat HaGadol. I love that, right? That sometimes our misunderstandings become enshrined and then take on all of these resonances and all of these explanations for why this is Shabbat HaGadol when it might have just been Shabbat HaGadol. All right, so, all right, love that. That theory may be fanciful, but the concept of preparing for our festival of freedom by reading and reflecting is an important one. And perhaps even more important in our days when extremism and racism is legitimized. The expression ad kan, thus far, is very resonant. Because in Hebrew, this is me talking now, ad kan in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew means till here and that's it. Ad kan, right, till here. That's it. Here's a boundary. Yesh gvul, there's a boundary. Thus far is very resonant. as explicitly racist, anti-democratic, and homophobic attitudes come to prominence, thus far, like Ad Kan, to hear on Shabbat HaGadol takes on new meaning. It may be a call for us, as we enjoy the fruits of freedom and anticipate the prospect of a good meal, to ask ourselves, what attitudes and actions are unacceptable to us? What will prompt us to go out and resist, without violence and without demagoguery? When will we say, Ad Kan, until this and no further? That day will indeed be a Shabbat HaGadol, a great Shabbat. So again, a little more pointed than I usually get, but I got to tell you, I'm so frustrated right now that that teaching like just jumped off the page in terms of when will we say enough? So Dayenu, yes, it would have been sufficient, but God went beyond that. It would have been enough, but God went beyond that. Rabbi Marmer is saying our festival celebrating our freedom is also about saying Ad Kan, to hear, enough. It's enough. When will we say enough and do something and start taking actions that will protect the freedoms that we all need? And he's talking and he quotes those needs that are mentioned in Dayenu that are not just food. Food insecurity is bad enough. But what about Medicaid? What about Medicare? What about research for curing and treating Alzheimer's and cancer? And how many other diseases that we won't have in place 20 years from now because we're cutting all the research now? What about sending innocent people to concentration camps, to torture camps? I just, Ad Kan. When are we going to be able to say Ad Kan? To here and no further. That teaching was like so resonant for me because Pesach is not just about liberation from. We talk about this a lot. Judaism is not about freedom from, it is freedom to. Freedom to what? To build, according to our tradition, a just and equitable society where the vulnerable are taken care of. Remember how we looked so closely the last few years at Deuteronomy? That's really what Deuteronomy is all about, right? That it's about, don't think y'all are on third because you hit a triple. Y'all are only here because I took you out of Egypt, lihiyot lachem le'elohim, to be for you the guiding force, to be for you the force, the important thing, God. Not money, not fame, not comfort, not leisure, not golf, not even pickleball. Chas v'shalom. But to be for you, Elohim, to be for you, God, to be the most important set of guiding principles, holiness, goodness, justice, equity, compassion. So redemption is about that. That's what redemption's for. But part of what I think we get afraid to say sometimes is in that we have to be able to say Dayenu. We have to be able to say Ad Kan, to hear and no further. Like in Hebrew, parents turn to their children and say Ad Kan, dai, enough, right? Dogs and children, no, dai, which of course I said to my daughter, and of course people heard me saying English, and so they thought that was cruel and horrible, what I was saying to my daughter in that tone, dai. I'm like, whatever. So, but dai, enough. And the other thing they say in modern Hebrew is yesh gvul. There is a boundary. Yesh gvul, and then they add the word mesuyam, like fixed. Yesh gvul mesuyam. There is a very clear boundary, meaning you have come up to it. Yesh gvul mesuyam. And I just wonder where and when are we going to start using our Jewish voices to say, we are not just free from, but we are free to. And where does that mean we have to start saying, dai, enough. Here's the limit, Ad Kan. Because apparently that goes back at least 1,000 years, the Ad Kan. And the reading about what our freedom is for goes back 2,000. So I just am curious about your thoughts about Shabbat HaGadol, about this idea of studying the Haggadah as the text for Shabbat HaGadol. How this idea of liberation having its roots in Shabbat. Anything that's on the table is up for discussion. Bert.
As we were leaving Egypt, as you recall, Amalek came and attacked the weak and the destitute and took advantage as we were moving forward, as we were trying to move forward, of the weakest. And we are told never to forget that and to wipe out Amalek. And it's an old story. It's not a new story at all. And one of the things about godliness and bringing godliness into the world is godliness is not attacking the weak. That's not what godliness is all about. It's not about lying. It's not about cheating. It's about not about stealing. It's about a whole other set of morals. And you're totally right. How do we stand up for it? How do we deal with our powerlessness is a real question. I know I can't change this. So what do I do? What do I do?
You bring up a really good point, Bert, which is Amalek attacked, but Israel was attacked by many different countries. But we were told to wipe out the memory of Amalek. And yet, Zechor, Ma she'asa Amalek, right? But remember what Amalek did to you. But why? Why was the attack of Amalek so heinous that the rabbis are like, wipe out even the memory of Amalek? It's because they, on purpose, attacked from behind, because who's behind are the young, little ones, people who are sick, and the elderly, the frail. So the powerless. And that even in war, there is an understanding, you don't do that. You just don't do that. So it was considered particularly heinous to go after the most vulnerable who couldn't fight back. So I'll just leave it there. Alex.
I keep coming back with the complexity of what's still happening in Israel and my love of a place I've never been and standing with Israel, yet, so many people suffering at the expense of the nation, of the cause. And, my day to day, I seem to forget. And then I remember the hostages they're still hostages, and there are all these children dying at the expense of our bombs, or Israel's bombs. So when we come again to this is the second Passover since October 7th, just kind of contending with that, and what in the name of God or this state, what justice, equity, all of those things. So this is kind of stream of consciousness, but I'm just putting it out there because I still, again, to get back to it, Bert, is just the powerlessness in this. And again, another state that has a leader that doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
Okay. So thank you. And you are completely in line with the rest of Israeli society. Israeli society is deeply divided, and Israeli society is deeply conflicted, because there's just not a great, easy answer going forward that anyone can give, except the radical right? They have an answer.
Well, speaking of Torah, though, I don't think there is an answer to this. Like, you have to defend, and yet it's that balance that you used to talk about between compassion and justice. But the application of it, it's just so messy.
It's so messy. And so but God says to the angels, that when the angels say, how could you give Torah to those apes? Essentially those apes that talk. How could you give the precious Torah to human beings? Why didn't you give Torah to us, the angels? We deserve it more than those monkeys. And what does God say? What do you need Torah for? Do you steal? Do you kill? You don't need Torah. They need Torah, right? Because in other words, Torah recognizes that human societies are messy, and trying to figure out the application of justice is complicated and messy and not easy and often torturous. And so I really can't highly enough recommend the podcast For Heaven's Sake. I think it was the last episode is Doniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi talking about the resumption of the war and their deep sense of feeling conflicted about both needing to address the impossibility of having Hamas be in charge in Gaza, but the reality that it could be a death sentence for the hostages to resume the war. And if they've been fighting for this long and Hamas is still rearming, then what the heck was the war about anyway? So it's just, but just listening from an Israeli perspective to people who are sitting with the serious complications of calling up reservists who have been serving since the beginning of the war, off and on, at the same time that they are passing, because of this government, they are passing exemption from military service for the ultra-Orthodox.
Yeah. So, I guess it's like, you look at the past 2 years and where are we now? And
yes,
what, are we is anything, yes, there were some hostages that were returned. What a blessing. But, has anything really in the meta been furthered? Except
Right.
to me, like, there's just the complexity of the situation and a lot of hypocrisy.
So, well, right. Like, well, hypocrisy is the human's middle name, right? Like, we preach a lot of things and then turn around and, and do what someone else might consider completely against what we say we stand for. America right now is being, I mean, how do you think Canada feels about America and Americans right now? Talk about hypocrisy. So, but it's okay. We're going to make them the 51st state, and then it's all going to be fine. Well, we have to annex Greenland first. But after we do that. So I just want to say again, For Heaven's Sake, it's a podcast from Hartman, and it's a great series because it's Israelis talking native English speakers talking from a Zionist perspective, from an inclusive Zionist perspective, about very complicated matters. They are very educated. They are very deeply committed to pluralism and Zionism, liberal Zionism. So anyway, so I cannot recommend that podcast highly enough. Susan.
I just want to say that to me, the quintessential essence of Judaism is the ability to live with logic-type compartments, because the commandment is to always remember to wipe out the memory of Amalek. And if you wiped out the memory, you couldn't remember to fulfill the commandment. So that ability to just have a commandment that includes two logic-type compartments and to observe it is so quintessential Jewish.
Very much so. Very much so. I agree completely. Bert?
Many years ago, I put together a Haggadah a progressive Haggadah from a lot of different Haggadot, which we use every year at our family Seder. And of course, we got burned out. We have no more family home. And it turns out that this year, our Seder is only going to be 50% Jewish people. And the other 50% is a couple of Christians and several Muslims who happen to be Egyptian.
Right.
So how do you make a Seder that is respectful of everybody there, without saying bad stuff about the Egyptians? And this brought out something that I heard on a podcast from Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Valley Beth Shalom. He said one of the fascinating things about Pesach and Haggadah is we don't dwell on the slavery piece. We don't dwell on the 400 years. The Seder in Pesach is about our redemption. It's about freedom. It's not just about fixating on the time when we were slaves. Yes, the slaves is part of it, but the central story of Passover is freedom.
Beautiful. I'll go one step further. The point of the Seder is that we're supposed to tell it as people who are landed, comfortable people. Don't forget, you were slaves. You had nothing. You were conscripted labor. Don't do that to somebody else. That's what. So partly, it's also about it focuses on our liberation. But the reason we keep telling it is because it's talking to us. You Americans, don't do that to your people, and don't do it to other people, right? You can't buy cheap tennis shoes if you use child labor. Sorry. That's not why you were freed from that, was to do it to somebody else. Don't ever forget. It was you. Your kids would have been the ones in those sweatshops. Your children, Eliana Faye would have been one of those kids. So yes, and I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't demonize the Egyptians. It's saying don't be hypocrites, right? Think about how many times in America's history we used conscripted labor. That's no different than the Egyptians at all. It's the same exact thing. That, when people are put to work in sweatshops for nothing, then it's exactly, you were redeemed from slavery. You can't enslave other people. You were oppressed. You can't do that to others. And so we're aligning in some ways with the Egyptians, right? That's why we do this whole business. Don't think you're free and successful because you achieved something. It's because I took you out from that. Therefore, you are obligated by your redemption to make sure you're not doing it to anybody else. And that's a really important part of the practice for me, is to have it remind us and remind everyone
Yes.
at the table that we're saying don't do it, and check yourselves. Where are you doing it, America? Okay, George?
And we regret the killing of the Egyptian soldiers in the river that
Yes.
drowned them.
Right? So we take out from our own cup, right, as we read what happened to the Egyptians, right? That we can at the same time understand that there might be a necessity to go to war in Gaza and feel horrible for what's happening there. That they're not mutually exclusive, right? Just as one example. But, yes, we have to deal with the border. Yes, we have to deal with security. Yes. And we need to be responsible about it, right? And not send somebody with an autism tattoo to a concentration camp. Oh my God. As we come to the close of our study for Shabbat HaGadol, may we all figure out where it is we need liberation to be at work in our lives and where it is that we need to commit to action to help liberate others. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.